How old are your kids?
4 and 1.
4 and 1.
We are back on Spiro Avenue, and I have to tell you, I love you. I love you all. It has been a very supportive audience since we got this thing back going a couple months ago. And because I love you so much, and I hold you all in such a deep, dear place in my heart, I am proud to bring you tonight a friend of mine and the best journalist in the state of Michigan, as awarded by me, the only vote that matters in this studio, Chad Livengood, Crain's Detroit Business, the top journalist in the state of Michigan. I challenge you to provide a name that can challenge him. You won't be able to. Chad Livengood across from me in studio on Spiro Avenue. How are you, Chad?
I'm good. I'm just surviving the pandemic every day.
You're surviving the pandemic, and the pandemic will be a key topic today, probably the key topic in particular with how our governor here in the state of Michigan has handled it for better or for worse. I don't want to cast aspersions or cast you in a role, but let's just get any biases that are out there, right at the beginning that you may have, so no one can say, oh, this is a right-wing hatchet job. I followed you for a long time. Is it fair to say that you are left-leaning? Is that okay for me to say up front?
There are some people that conclude that.
Okay, but you're not a right-wing hatchet man. You're not working for the GOP. So
I'm certainly not working for the GOP.
Todd Corser can attest to that. For those of you that know that backstory. So Chad, in my opinion, is a left-leaning guy, not a far lefty, but a left-leaning guy. So that's the frame that I want to put this in. I think that your coverage on Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, has been exemplary. I think it's been on the ball from the beginning, particularly the last few weeks. You've had a few pieces. I want to start from a few weeks back, right at the end of August 31st. You write an article focusing on the small businesses in Detroit, in Metro Detroit, particularly bowling alleys, gyms, ice rinks, etc., that are on the verge of collapse. Your article in Crain's outlined a number of issues with Gretchen Whitmer's approach to how these businesses have been handled. She, for example, vetoed legislation, and you discuss this in the article, vetoed legislation that would have given a tax extension to these small businesses just so they could keep their doors open and their bills down a little longer. Just in general, from that article, from your experience, you've interviewed business owners. There was a bowling alley owner that you discussed in great detail in that article. In general, your experience from covering this, how has Gretchen Whitmer handled the small businesses and businesses in general throughout this process?
Well, from the start, the governor took this approach that we had to basically shut down all really what was deemed non-essential business activity that really isn't necessary for the continuation of human life, which at the time that made a lot of sense. I mean, this virus was real, and it still is real. It was raging. It was making a lot of people sick really fast. As anybody in Metro Detroit understands, a lot of our hospitals were very much overrun. Beaumont, Royal Oak, Detroit Medical Center, Detroit Receiving Hospital at the DMC, the Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit, all were at capacity, and we really did see a surge. And it was taking up a lot of our resources, burning through PPE. We had hospitals that were down to 2 or 3 days worth. Beaumont Royal Oak was just hanging on the edge. I think U of M, Ann Arbor as well for many weeks there. So the whole idea initially was we got to shut this down. We got to stop this curve from accelerating up. And over time that worked. I mean, I've written that the governor was successful on this. I'm convinced that the governor saved lives along the way. Then we got into this kind of long, drawn-out procedure for trying to reopen the economy. And the governor took this kind of, she used this sort of dial idea that we're turning the dial, we're not flipping a switch. And as they've turned this dial, we started the first week in May. They opened up the construction industry, the real estate industry. Then they let manufacturing and auto plants restarted in mid-May. And then by Memorial Day, she was opening up restaurants and bars up north, and then by the next week in June, it was restaurants and bars downstate. I mean, it was kind of one after another. And then we started basically sort of testing. Really was one big science experiment to sort of see how it worked, and we found out pretty quickly. For your East Lansing listeners, that Harper's was not a good place to be in mid-June.
Learn the hard way. Harper's isn't a good place to be at any time of year in any pandemic or not scenario, but that's another story.
Exactly. Well, and so the governor pulled back, and she said, okay, bar service is prohibited indoors if you make more than 70% of your sales from alcohol. And so bars were forced to build outdoor, patios and such, and get creative with their parking lots, and everybody has kind of just gotten along all summer long. Well, they did all of this. They accommodated all these other businesses, and then they left a bunch of businesses kind of on the sideline over here. The couple of the big ones were the casinos in Detroit that had a plan at the beginning of June that they were going to go back to 15% occupancy, which is kind of like what normal daily traffic looks like at Greektown Casino, basically.
Yeah.
Except for with the exception of like big fight nights and other big events or when they have concerts, those places aren't packed to the gills ever. But they let the casinos reopen at the beginning of August, and then it was like, okay, if you're going to like casinos, if that's an okay behavior to go and just pull a slot machine, why can't you go pick up a bowling ball? And I'll be honest, I'm not too hot about bowling in the pandemic. I like bowling. I'm not like a regular bowler, but just to back up, a little backstory. On Sunday, March 8th, I went bowling with my whole family at Belmark Lanes in Ann Arbor for my brother's birthday party. We all met up there, and after that, I went to the Diag at U of M with 10,000 of Bernie Sanders' best friends to cover a Sanders rally on 2 days before the primary. So I look back at that and think, holy cow, I was really exposed, potentially to the virus in multiple settings. The next day, I was with the governor. She was at the Livonia Chamber of Commerce, and she was trying to promote elbow bumps and such. But that night, I went to a rally with a Joe Biden rally with 1,500 people at Detroit Renaissance High School in the gymnasium. Now they handed everybody a big pile of hand sanitizer on the way in, but still, like I look back and I'm like, oh man, between the bowling alley and the Bernie rally and the Biden rally, there's a lot of places you could get exposed. I don't have any interest in going to a political rally personally or even professionally at this point, and I don't have any interest in going bowling, but I do have an interest in understanding the decision making that goes on in state government that is basically bankrupting a bunch of businesses in Michigan right now by keeping them closed indefinitely. And they've since I wrote about the bowling alley thing, the governor did allow organized sports, so that has created a loophole for bowling alleys to operate for leagues only. So apparently it's okay if a bunch of 50-year-old men and 60-year-old men get together and bowl on Tuesday night, but it's not okay for a bunch of 16-year-old kids, teenagers, to go laser bowling or whatever they call it on Saturday night at Belmark Lanes in Ann Arbor or wherever. And so that's part of what my job at Crain's is, just kind of like fly spec some of this stuff, try to understand, okay, what is the reasoning here? And as we've gone along further and further, there's been just a lot of head-scratching amendments to these executive orders that you can't hardly make sense of. That the governor's office has to then turn around and explain in their frequently asked questions. The governor herself does not answer very many questions about these EEOs anymore, and her staff is never made really available to do so. So they have to put out these FAQs that have sort of, they're not really law, but they're being sort of treated like, well, if you don't understand, this is what we really mean, is that, yeah, you can have an event with 250 people up north, but you can't have a wedding with 250 people. I mean, there's just all the kinds of different things that even a person plain reading the executive orders could not decipher. And I've been just following this because I also talk to a lot of people, and both in the business industry that are trying to live under the rules, and I think a lot of small businesses that have adapted this. A lot of businesses in general, they've adapted this, knowing that they take the virus really seriously, and they also want to be able to work to make a living, and
God forbid.
And that's what they're and so they're willing to jump over. I mean, these bowling alleys will just do anything the governor tells them to at this point, in order to basically make money to pay their taxes, pay their insurance, pay their just fixed costs. I mean, it's not so simple as you just shut down and you don't have any expenses because you had to lay all your workers off. Well, yeah, you still have the property tax bill that came due in July, and you still have insurance, and you still have other overhead costs that have nothing to do with just operating the business day to day. And I'm not trying to take the side here of the bowling alley or the movie theater, but I am trying to understand is how does that business get back to work? And if not, well, maybe the state government ought to be just paying these businesses to not operate in the good of public health. And I've suggested that as well, that if we're not going to let them reopen, we ought to just cut them a check for their fixed expenses of leases, rent, mortgage, utilities. I mean, it sounds very Bernie Sanders, but it's actually really a reasonable idea at this point. You're 6 months in, and you're going to basically ruin a small number of people's lives if you continue to keep them closed indefinitely without any way to really make money.
And there's so much to unpack there. I think the biggest thing, well, let's start here. You talked about these businesses being willing to jump through a lot of hoops. They'll do anything. I don't know if you were familiar with Paul Glantz and Imagine Theaters. He's the owner, and he just stepped down from CEO. Paul Glantz, Imagine Theaters. Check them out. They're all over Michigan. They're the best. He wanted to host a Juneteenth festival at Imagine. Socially distanced, the hand sanitizers, masks, the whole thing. He went to the state and said, I will follow any guidelines you guys want me to do. I just want to hold this festival. And it was going to be, I think it was all African-American directors or leads, or there was some, theme there. So it was a celebration festival. He wasn't even going to charge people. He was going to just have it be like an open. You had to RSVP because there was a limit. But he said, I'll do anything. I just want to get this going. I want to do it for the community. And he got a letter threatening him, which he published, threatening him with criminal charges if he proceeded with this. And it just speaks to, is the state pushing too hard on a business in this case, he wasn't even trying to make money on this, from my understanding. He's just saying, I'm trying to do something for the community, and the government's role, I guess, is to come in and tell them, not only can't you or you'll be fined, but we could potentially arrest you. Like, they're going to show up and put the cuffs, the silver bracelets on Paul Glantz, who's like Mr. Rogers, if you don't know Paul Glantz. I mean, he's like probably the nicest guy in the state of Michigan. So that's the sort of tone that I think a lot of people take an issue with, where when small business owners have pushed back on some of these things publicly and in letters and have appealed to the governor and her staff for some guidance on these things, she came out, and I'm paraphrasing, but and maybe you can correct me. Did she not come out and say that she's not going to be bullied by these business owners, that she's going to do what she's going to do, basically? Is that, pretty close to the
she
quote?
got asked a direct question. Well, when are you going to allow, it was 1 week she was asked in August, when are you going to allow bowling alleys, movie theaters, ice rinks to reopen.
Right.
She said, next week I'm going to have an update on that. So then the next week at the next press conference, she got asked that because, the press corps in Lansing is really, really smart and sharp. And they just, when a question goes unanswered, someone remembers and then asks it the next week. And there's very limited opportunity to get questions to the governor anymore. And they're in a very tight format. We're not even in the room with her anymore.
Why do you think she does that? I want to interject on that. Why do you think we've had the limited access?
I couldn't really speculate about that at this point. I mean, it has. Look, she has said they're not allowing reporters in the room because of her own executive order saying that there has to be fewer than 10 people at a gathering indoors.
What about Zoom? I mean, the Detroit Tigers have 17 reporters.
We do. On Zoom. They do let reporters on Zoom, although they limit that as well, like to about 10 or 12 reporters on Zoom to then ask the question via Zoom, even though she's standing in an empty auditorium, press auditorium. So that's basically the state of access because of the 10-person limit. They don't think they can have 10 people in the press auditorium, which is basically like a 30-seat press auditorium or a little auditorium. But so they're trying to adhere to their own rules, which makes sense. But we've been kind of back and forth early on in the pandemic. They were only letting 2 reporters in. It was reporters that the governor's office picked from the press pool, and then they would be allowed to go in and basically served as pool reporters and ask questions and such. And that worked all right. I mean, but then when she ended the stay-at-home order, they started opening up press events to a dozen reporters, basically. It was first come, first serve, and I went to 2 of them in Lansing. I mean, but to get back to the where we are right now with the virus, the movie theater, and I've pointed this out now in 2 columns, and I've heard that the governor's office is kind of perturbed by this, which is okay because they need to answer this question: what is the difference between a movie theater and a college lecture hall? Physically,
I mean, they're usually built by the same architect.
Well, they're constructed the same thing. I mean, they are a stadium seating style room that can hold somewhere between 70 to 150 people or something along that lines. They're configured the same way. And I think when the movie theaters reopen, I mean, I'm pretty certain everyone's got to wear a mask in the movie theater. I don't think that's probably too much to ask. And there's going to be, probably socially distanced. Seats are going to be cordoned off, so you can only sit in certain seats, and that'll be the norm until we get a vaccine, basically, like all other aspects of our lives. But we're not allowing that for some reason. We're still not allowing that even to take place, or even giving them a shot at actually reopening. And to be honest, when Imagine and Company reopen, it's not guaranteed that they're going to survive. I mean, the big movie production companies are holding off releases of all kinds of big movies until like 2020, end of 2021, or even 2022. And I'm not a huge movie buff, so I couldn't name them off here. Or they're just they're not going to necessarily get the same demand. People are going to be fearful of going back to the movie theater. They're just going to say, that's something I don't want to do or take that risk. And so it's not even, like I said, it's not even guaranteed that the movie theaters are going to actually survive once they get reopened. But they're definitely not going to survive just basically dying on the vine under government dictate to stay closed.
It reminds me, it's like the Irish guy in Titanic in third class who's like behind the gate while the ship is sinking, and it's like, even if they let him through, he's probably going to die, but he's just shaking the gate and saying, like, come on, give us a chance, like, let us out so we can have a chance. Let these businesses open just so they can have a chance would be the argument. I think what you took issue with in that August 31st article that I found resonated with me anyway, was there's a lack of communication and a lack of leadership there. That, okay, you're doing this, explain why. Why are you doing this? I think the communication has been poor in a number of ways. The biggest thing, and again, you have talked about this quite a few times so far in this summer, the lack of defining of the criteria for reopening and reopening to this phase, that phase. What is the percentage of COVID infections in the area that the movie theaters can then, flip on? Like, when can they open? There's no even goalpost to move. We don't have goalposts. Everything, it just seems to be kind of legislated by fiat. And without that direction, you're asking a lot of people. You're saying you're going to lose your livelihood. A lot of businesses, we're talking about movie theaters. We don't know if they might survive. We don't have to talk about the future for industries that have gone under, companies that have gone under, mom and pop shops that have gone under. The damage has been done in that regard. Do you think that they've met their duty, that if they're going to force this on people, whether it's the right thing or not, we don't even have to dispute that, but do you think that they've met their duty to communicate the reasons why properly and the data that they need to see pop up on the chart before they release the restraints on these companies?
Not really. I haven't. There's been a whole host of different examples. One was this summer when the governor pulled back on regions 6 and 8, and region 6 is basically the 17 counties of the northern lower peninsula. Basically stretches from Traverse City over to Alpena, and it's a whole kind of vast, north of the knuckles, basically, and just for anybody using their hand at home, and but. And then Region 8 is the Upper Peninsula. Well, when they decided to pull back on bars in those regions, which came out of nowhere at the end of July, there was really no data or science or evidence presented at all that said, hey, this is dangerous. Other than they just wanted to, they seemed to just want to basically apply the same rules they had going downstate to the rest of the state. I could not get an answer out of anybody of, okay, what is this little bar? It is a little bar in Gold City on US 2 in the southern lower peninsula, about 40 miles from the bridge. I've happened to have been there once when I went on a family camping trip nearby and stopped in because they had a sign outside that said they sold fresh eggs in a bar. And this little biker bar there, what is the threat there? Versus is it a nightclub in Traverse City that actually caused it, and how do you apply the same rules and why do you apply the same punishment to that little bar nestled out in the woods in the Upper Peninsula versus something in the more populous area? And that's one of the pitfalls of these regions that they developed. They let big business people develop, by the way. Is that they're not necessarily attached to reality of where the actual virus is right now, and so in the August 31st article or whatever, end of August, that column I featured this bowling alley operator in Ludington, where the virus is still a very distant thing in Mason County, and the threat at the bowling alley seems a lot less than the bowling alley in Ann Arbor that I went to. That may not be a good place to go, but there hasn't been any kind of nuance to this. It's been an across the board. Everybody gets hit by this rule. And Ludington and Mason County got drawn into the region with Grand Rapids. There's certainly been a lot of problems of COVID-19 in Kent County and Grand Rapids, but when you get out to Newaygo County and Mason County, it's not that prevalent or hasn't shown up, at least so, in testing to date, and yet we're prescribing the same exact medicine for trying to mitigate the spread in these communities that have gone through the summer, there are tourism meccas, and they've gone through the summer and not had a whole lot of problems, not had a whole lot of hospitalizations to really account for. Right now there's like one person hospitalized in the entire Upper Peninsula for coronavirus. There's basically one person hospitalized all summer long in the Upper Peninsula for coronavirus at any given day of the week, and not to mitigate or minimize that one person's ailment and sickness, But is that enough to make this necessary to apply all these kind of broad rules across the board? I think that's questionable at this point.
Questionable at best. And people like to say, oh, you can't bring up car crashes because car crashes aren't contagious, which is a straw man defense of that statement. The bottom line is, in life, you always make risk assessments. Driving to work, whatever you do, I can take a risk eating at a cheap sushi place. I mean, everything has some level of risk, the most of which would be just getting in the car and driving every day. You have a much higher chance of dying in the UP from driving than you do from COVID-19. I think there's a risk assessment that you have to make, and it's everyone's right to make. I will say in Gretchen Whitmer's defense, I would not want to be Gretchen Whitmer or anyone on her staff during this period, because I think you have such a divided state, just in the same way the country is divided. And if she took a more Ron DeSantis in Florida approach, where we're just going to be really hands-off and, let it kind of, I hate to say the term burn through, but that's basically what Florida's approach was for a time. You're going to piss off the other half of the state. You mentioned the bowling alley owner.
Well, you're also going to have you probably would have had more people die. I mean, that's...
Well, probably.
If she handled it like DeSantis did, just because it was already very much spreading around our communities, particularly in Southeast Michigan, in late February. We hadn't detected it yet because the testing was horrible. But if we had testing capability like we have now, we would have found it pretty quickly, and maybe we would have been able to stop it. And maybe some of these, rules and orders to try to basically mitigate human activity. That's really what it comes down to, is just human activity, touch, and transmission. But we didn't have that. We weren't prepared as a state or a country, and it took a long time really to kind of get that testing capability up. But now we have that testing capability, and it's there, and we're testing 3 times as many people as we were at the beginning, at the middle of April, when we were still registering 125 to 150 people a day dying, and now we are under 8 a day average on a 7-day average, and our caseload is, even though the caseload is in the 650 to 750 a day average, it's not affecting people the same way it was back in April. I mean, yesterday the Ingham County health officer said there's 1,250 active cases in linked to Michigan State University. There's not one person in the hospital in Ingham County right now, according to the health officer, as a result of coronavirus. So it's not, the variables of this virus have changed. And that was the point of my column this week, is those have changed, but the policies and how we're trying to navigate it and manage it, they have not really changed.
I think, and you had a quote in the article too, which I'll paraphrase, from Gretchen Whitmer, where I think she seems to be admitting that, look, I bit off more than I can chew. It's impossible to manage all these counties, all these industries, what's safe, what's not. We barely know what we're doing with the virus yet, let alone how it's going to affect Ingham County versus Wayne County versus Kent County. It's impossible to do. And I think you can't rule with an iron fist with these executive orders, like you said, in this big blanket, when it's one state, but it's about 375 different sets of variables in different communities and different implications. Do you sense that even she is really starting to get that the government can't do what they've been doing, that they have to back off?
Yeah, I mean, she has said as much she has said that the state of emergency is only going to last a matter of months still. Didn't say how many months, but when you hear her talk about it, it sounds like 3 or 4, just kind of ballpark. Not that's sort of speculation on my end, again, because we haven't been able to pin her down on it. But she did make this comment last week that said she was praising the efforts of Ottawa County that issued a stay-at-home order to Grand Valley State University students, and the Ingham County Health Department that issued very targeted quarantine orders to some 39, 40 different houses in East Lansing, 23 or 4 sorority and frat houses in particular that had students who tested positive and were known for having some parties and some outbreaks. And she was praising that and said, based on the state of this virus, we can't have a one-size-fits-all approach. And I thought that was really kind of telling that, she has really managed with and I said micromanage, which took a lot of her close followers off, but this has been micromanaged. And in many ways, that's been necessary, at least at the outset. That was necessary to try to get a handle on this thing. As time has gone on, I'm not sure that the micromanagement approach and that heavy hand is justified. I just haven't seen really a lot of evidence that says yes, we have to really limit these weddings from happening. But what happened last week was, in one of her amended executive orders, and based on the FAQs, the government is now telling people it's okay for 250 unrelated people to have a business meeting at the Grand Traverse Resort, but 25 people unrelated can't go to a wedding at the Grand Traverse Resort. That there's still a limit of 10 people. Okay, what is the difference? I've been to a lot of business conferences. People mix it up there, just like they do mix it up at a wedding. Do they dance as much? Maybe not, but they certainly are congregating close to each other in much the same way. And so, again, what is the difference between these two types of activities? And so that's where I said that the governor has been micromanaging this thing. But, when she goes and says, can't have one-size-fits-all approach, it seemed like a kind of an admission that, the beginning of the end of that approach is kind of here.
It's interesting because you made the great point just now about, again, the inconsistency we see again and again, where 250 people here is okay in this context, 25 people in this other context somehow is safe. I think that's a tough road to hoe. When your entire defense of everything you've done, you've ruled with an iron fist, you've been tough, you've been strict, you've been considered one of the 3 or 4 strictest, most intense lockdown governors in the union. I think it's tough to hide behind the science when this is how you're operating, because that's been the go-to. The go-to defense for Gretchen Whitmer and her team has been, we're following the science, and that has been their sort of deferred point, where anytime there's any type of challenge, we're following the science. How is the science consistent with your example of 250 people in a business meeting versus 25 people at a wedding? How is the science consistent with this protest in Lansing where the people are storming the Capitol armed? Didn't support it. I thought it was a little wacky. Supported the right to do it. Thought it was a crazy cause. They come out up in arms. Gretchen Whitmer and her staff were appalled that these people, half of them aren't wearing masks, and how could they do this? And these people are Operation Gridlock, and how terrible it was. And then 7, 8 days later, Gretchen Whitmer's walking hand in hand down the street in a protest of her own. I'm not arguing the merits of one protest or the other. COVID doesn't care about the merits of either protest. So if you're going to say, I'm going by the science, okay, explain the 250 versus 25 example that you talked about. Explain the college lecture hall versus the movie theater. Explain why no one can get on a boat except you and your husband. Sorry, cheap shot, right, Chad? But, the point is there's an inconsistency there that makes no sense. And look, if you are going to, by force, not by physical force, but by force of the leverage of the power of the government, take something from somebody, remove their right to a livelihood, you owe them a really good explanation why. And this goes up and down. It can be even on the most local level. I live in a neighborhood. We have a little community association. We have dues every year. Once in a while, every other year or so, we get a little letter in our mailbox. Hey, guys, dues are up. $280 this year. Not negotiable. We have to pay it because we have this issue, all the lights burned out, or the trash company that we worked with is out of business, which actually did happen. This one's more expensive. It's the best we could do. I don't have an option. I have to pay for it. But at least they outlined, hey, here's the copy of the termination of the contract from the previous disposal company. Here's the 6 bids that we had. See that we took the low bid. This company has good reviews, whatever. okay, I didn't get a vote in this. I had to pay the $285 extra a year, whatever it was. But you explained why. But if you're shutting down these businesses and forcing them out, and you have no explanation for this 250 versus 25, or why this protest is okay and this one isn't, at the end of the day, if you're going to do that to people, you better be available. You better not get pushy and defensive with questions saying that they're bullying you for asking what I think are totally fair questions. I think my biggest issue is the inconsistency and the defensiveness, more so than it is even the shutdowns themselves, because I have been defensive of her, especially in those early months. And I had friends, typically on the right, that were clobbering me for defending her, saying I think we were taking the prudent approach and shutting things down. But at the end of the day, I don't think she can stand by how she's done the last couple months. I think it has been a failing on her part. And the bowling alley owner, I'm going to pull this quote directly from your article. This is what he said. August 31st, I didn't go out of business because I'm a crummy business owner. I didn't go out of business because I yelled and screamed at my customers and forced them to leave. I've been shut down by one person. Only one person shut me down, and I'll lose my whole business if I can't get open soon. You've talked to a lot of business owners. There is contempt, it seems, for the governor at this point. But you look at the polling. The Detroit News had a poll on September 9th. 59% COVID approval. Anecdotally, my experience, I'm a nursing home administrator. These families have been particularly affected. I think Gretchen Whitmer probably has about a 9% approval rating with these families. Know a lot of business owners, Paul Glantz being one of them. I don't know where this 59% is coming from. In your experience, what is sort of the mood of the people you've talked to? You write for Detroit, Crain's Detroit business. You're the Wall Street Journal of Detroit. What are business owners telling you about this?
It just depends on what type of business owner you talk to. If you talk to an executive at a major corporation, they're just fine and happy with the governor. And that was, her reopening plan was crafted by the chair, definitely the chairman of Business Leaders from Michigan, Jerry Anderson, the executive chairman of DTE Energy. You had General Motors, Herman Miller, Lear Corp, the heads of big hospitals such as Beaumont and Henry Ford, Nancy Schlichting, the former CEO of Henry Ford Health System. You had the heads of major universities who also happen to be experts in infectious diseases. Roy Wilson at Wayne State, Mark Schlissel at U of M, Samuel Stanley at MSU. They all advised the governor on this reopening plan. And by my estimations, pretty much all of their businesses got reopened pretty quickly, if they weren't already, because the hospitals obviously never shut down. But the automakers got what they wanted. They got to restart their plants pretty quickly. There was no onerous regulations placed on like Quicken Loans that I can tell, other than they have to keep people distant and inside of office buildings. But then you start looking at these different types of small businesses that don't have as big of a megaphone in Lansing, and they seem to be the ones who got kind of shortchanged. The restaurants and various liquor lobbies, they've got a pretty good lobby in Lansing, and they got what they wanted early on, and then they got kind of pulled back and told, the governor came and made it look like she was closing all indoor service in bars. But there was a big, huge loophole in this thing that said if you're a bar and you have to close your indoor service if you make more than 70% of your gross receipts on alcohol sales. Well, a lot of bars already sell a lot of food, and they have a good chunk of the revenue already comes from food. So a lot of bars didn't close, and if they didn't, I know of some watering holes in different parts of the state. That one in particular in Oscoda, those guys were just selling bags of chips a year ago, and now they have a full kitchen in order to basically circumvent and go through the loophole. But again, what's the science between a bar operating at 69% of their sales alcohol and a bar operating at 71% of their sales alcohol? Well, nothing. But that whole executive order was aimed at shutting down harbors and the Wayside in Mount Pleasant and Club Necto in is that in Ann Arbor?
They should have shut down the Wayside a long time ago in Mount Pleasant. That place has been responsible for diseases long before COVID-19 was concocted.
A lot worse than that. As a former CMU alum, I can attest.
Yeah, Ben's like, I've burned through all the diseases at the Wayside. He's immune to everything now.
Well, I also attended
O'Kelly's.
CMU, and yes, I plead guilty for going the Wayside freshman sophomore year.
Where else are you going to go? It's Mount
college.
Pleasant. It's like O'Kelly's or the Wayside. It's it's not the hop and bar scene there.
Well, I'm more of a bird guy, but anyways, and Marty's downtown. But I like hole in the wall bars. At any rate, but just for this example, actually, that whole executive order went after the Waysides and O'Kelly's of the world, but it harmed the watering holes. It harmed the Marty's bar in Mount Pleasant and the Bird and the Blackstone, and in doing so, they had to adapt and sell more food, basically to get around the order. And I mean, I don't see any difference between a restaurant that has a bar and a bar that serves food.
Not on a scientific basis. I think what their point is they have to draw the line somewhere. You have to create the guidelines somewhere, somehow. But again, if your entire shield that you're crafting in front of you to deflect all the slings and arrows is the science, your science better be able to hold up against some serious scrutiny. And it hasn't. That's the bottom line. And again, I have been honestly kind of a moderate on Gretchen Whitmer. I haven't been a harsh critic. I haven't been a staunch supporter. But again, the lack of communication and the lack of clarity on how these things are structured have been the biggest failing, in my estimation. It seems to be your conclusion, too. I know you're more of a neutral, ask questions, hey, why is this a certain way? So maybe I can put the exclamation on your point for you. But at the end of the day, your defense is the science. The science is not right. And if it is right, you better explain to me how. Because it doesn't make sense on paper. It doesn't make sense. This disease does not discriminate in these situations. And they seem to think that it does. I don't know how else to craft a response to what they've done. Just in general with Gretchen Whitmer, the thing that's been discussed mostly in your article from a few days ago, September 20th, is this 1945 emergency powers law that she has invoked repeatedly. The GOP is up in arms and pushing back pretty hard against that now. Just in general, do you think she has abused those powers in these past few months?
I'm not going to draw a conclusion on that. This was a law that was developed post-World War II to give the governor broad, extraordinary powers during times of emergency. Whether we're still in an emergency, I think, is debatable, based on this science. I mean, but the way that this law has been invoked over and over and over, especially after the circumstances that originally she was using another law, the 1976 emergency powers law, or emergency management law they called it. That a Republican legislature and a Republican governor, Bill Milliken, passed. This repeated use of it without basically having to go to the legislature and ask for permission or work with them to dictate law. I think that's still up for debate, for sure. I wrote about this in context that there is an initiative petition that they've gathered 500,000 signatures. It's called Unlock Michigan. It's mostly run by Republican political operatives who have are in the business of trying to knock off Gretchen Whitmer, or at least knock her down a peg before her reelection in 2022. They have gathered the signatures to try to repeal this thing, and the way our Constitution works is if you get a initiated law, and you have the required number of signatures, which is a minimum of 347,000, you can put this before the legislature to adopt this new law. And this bill would essentially just repeal the 1945 law and strip the governor of these powers in the middle of the pandemic. I am not taking a position on that, but I am kind of laid out like, the reality here is politically, can she really continue on just holding, trying to hold on to this power without trying to negotiate something with the legislature? Now, there are good arguments that the legislature is full of bad actors or people who are on their way out the door, lame ducks, and not necessarily looking out for long-term best interests of the people of Michigan, and that the governor is making an argument that she is. And so I see both sides of this argument, but at the end of the day, was the intent of the 1945 law to allow indefinite gubernatorial rule where the governor can just amend laws at the stroke of a pen and hold businesses, some of them hostage for a year, or because if it's gone on for 6 months, it could go on for a year, right?
Yeah, it could. I mean, I'll say this in general. And this goes for the presidential level, the state level, local level, however you cut it. I am in favor of unilateral executive power in emergencies. I think there's times where it's necessary, where you can't have red tape or hold a vote as people are dying left and right from a virus, or if there's nuclear fallout, God forbid, God knows what. I'm in favor of it in principle. But this in perpetuity thing, again, I think even Gretchen Whitmer understands time's about up for this. I mean, you said months. We don't know how many months. I tend to agree with you. 3 or 4 sounds more right. If I tell you, it'll be some months before I do something, I'm probably not talking about 10 or 11. I mean, so
since I wrote this, there's been a couple of developments.
Let's talk about it.
Yesterday, I was in Ann Arbor, caught up with the Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, and procedurally, these signatures get turned in. And then they have to go through a procedure where the State Bureau of Elections pulls a sample of 500 signatures and goes through and checks and makes sure that they're a valid signature of that voter based on what that signature is on file in the voter rolls, just like they do when they give you a ballot or give you an absentee ballot. And so that is a little bit of a time-consuming process. There is her own elections director is on record saying basically in summer months of an election year, they could do that in about 60 days. Yesterday, she said to me, well, on average, overall, it takes 105 days. And there happens to be 100 days left in this miserable year that we're living through. And
worst ever.
And so I tweeted this because I thought, well, this is kind of newsworthy, because she was basically just kind of said, I can basically run this thing out. And here's where the politics gets interesting. There is a fight right now in the election for control of the Michigan House of Representatives. The Democrats need to win 4 seats to take majority, or 4 seats to tie it, and 5 seats to take majority. And so if they are successful in doing that, and the Secretary of State basically does take her 105 days to certify the petition, they could run the clock out into the first couple of days of 2021, and the Democrats will be in power in the House, and they will block this from passing without, and then it will have to go to the ballot in 2022.
Stakes are high.
The stakes are very high.
Very high.
And so the governor has made, clearly politically also in the last couple of weeks, has put a lot of shift of her focus on winning these House races. Because this is basically the firewall to stop the repeal of the 1945 law. And also, frankly, it's the firewall to actually give the governor some leg up politically in her second 2 years in office, in the second half of her term, because frankly, next year, third year, that needs to be a year where she gets something significantly done. I mean, this year, whatever she got her road bonding plan passed with her own people and bypassing the legislature and with the state transportation commission. She did that in February, and then everything has been basically COVID-19 ever since. She's got a couple of programs along the way, but basically her agenda got derailed by both the pandemic and the economic upheaval.
And she gets a pass for that. Not to interrupt, but because I've had a couple people, they heard you were coming on, and they wanted you and I to crack on her for not fixing the damn roads. I had that message from 3 or 4 different people, and I said, I'm not going to criticize her for not fixing the roads. First of all, I don't think they would have fixed the roads anyway. I think that's something that has been talked about for years and years and years. But I think the whole situation changes when nobody saw this coming. It's going to swamp your funds. I mean, you want to talk about, I'll just give you one example. A nursing home administrator, family business, nursing home, obviously, industry affected greatly by this. State comes out with mandated testing weekly for all employees. These testing kits are, I believe, $140, $135 a piece. We have 175 or so employees. Do the math. We did it over the course of, I think it was 8 months or 10 months. We did some projection that we sent to them. It was $1 million. Maybe it was a year, but it was literally a 7-figure cost. And in this mandate, there was no clarification on, are we paying for this? Are you guys paying for it? There's nothing. It was just totally silent that you will test them. Are these tests even available for all these nursing homes that are now going to, by mandate, need them? The point is, they've blown out the budget. And as it turns out, they have been reimbursing us for those tests. These bills are insane. It's every week it's $30,000 or whatever it is. And it's just every week running again. That's all on the public dime. So I think it's safe to say she probably gets a pass for neglecting some of the things she campaigned on. Is that crazy of me to say?
I mean, she is going about fixing the damn roads without the legislature. I hold the legislature as an institution accountable and somewhat in contempt of producing America's worst roads, and
literally
both the legislature and term limits. I've written this before. I mean, we have really, really terribly underfunded our roads. And we have created policies that continue to allow more and more roads to go to pot. I mean, last year I wrote about how I was out on 26 Mile in Macomb Township one day visiting a friend and pulled out of their subdivision kind of a different way and drove a different road. And they were widening this road up by I can't remember the intersection. North Avenue? Yeah, North Avenue and 26 Mile. They were widening it to 5 lanes for a 1.5 mile stretch. And I thought to myself, first of all, where the hell did they get the money for that? Second of all, why are they widening it? And then driving down the road a little further, they were building high-density condos on 26 Mile Road out in the middle of a farm field. And I thought, this is what is wrong with what's going on, because at the time I had just come across a little stat that was alarming. Macomb County at the time, and this hasn't changed much, had 800 lane miles of road in poor condition. And I live in St. Clair Shores, so I know where these roads are. They're in Warren, they're in Sterling Heights, they're in Clinton Township, they're in Fraser. They're all over basically everything south of 20 Mile in Macomb County. They're the older suburbs. And it just kind of had an epiphany one day. Okay, we have actually built a state we can no longer afford to maintain. We've built infrastructure we just simply don't have enough money, or that we're not unwilling to tax ourselves to pay for. And I wrote that in a way that we've created more and more sprawl, and as we create that more sprawl, then we just let We have to then go back after the fact and widen the road to accommodate all the additional traffic. But then we don't even have money to take care of the roads we already have. But this is a result of public policy that starts with the legislature. And then it goes down to like Charter Township, and I don't get me started about them. But I don't fault the governor. I mean, I think she had to do what she had to do with that road bond plan. It's not going to fix local roads, but it's going to fix a whole lot of highways in Michigan and make them a lot better and safer. And also the little side effect of it, Justin, is we're going to get a stimulus out of this whole thing that we didn't even think we needed in February, when the economy was rolling, pretty nicely. But we're getting a stimulus this summer and this season, and then next year there's going to be a stimulus. So if we are in a long-term recession, this actually will turn out to be a job creator at a time when we actually really need it.
I mean, to put a wrap on the whole Gretchen Whitmer piece, I'll just say that for whatever criticisms, we've discussed, questions you've asked, because you're the consummate journalist, you just ask questions and present both sides. Maybe not so much for me, but for all that we can say negatively, I'll repeat, one of the hardest jobs in the history of American politics was being a governor, or in my opinion, sorry, Democrat friends, the president during this time. Terrible situation. Something we've never bargained for, something totally novel unless you want to go back 100-plus years to the Spanish flu. So I will say, for whatever we've said, this was tough. Mistakes were going to be made. I think it's time to start correcting some of those things, and that's kind of where I stand on it. It's time to move forward. I think people are ready for it. I think people are just done. I think people are just fed up with it. But I appreciate your reporting on it. I think you've been great. I think you've been very fair. And that's sort of your MO. I got to admit, Chad, I tried to pin you a couple times. I tried to get you to talk about the protest difference. I tried to get you to talk about the executive order and potential abuses of that, those powers and all that. But you're playing it straight. I mean, that's what you do. So I commend you for that, I guess. But it would be great if you came in here with just a torch once in a while. But you don't rattle, my man. You don't rattle.
I don't bite at every apple.
You don't bite at any apples. I think you're fasting for Ramadan or something over there. I threw you some bait. You wouldn't take it. You're smarter than me. I can't. I got to get someone dumber than me across the desk next time. But I want to talk about this. We'll transition off Gretchen Whitmer, for the love of God, and COVID-19. Talk about anything else, as my grandma would say. Talk about anything but this. The District Detroit. I don't want to get too deep into this. You haven't covered it in a while, and frankly, there's not that much new, which might be kind of the point, that there isn't much new with the District Detroit. I want to play, as sort of the launching point for this discussion, a clip from Chris Ilitch in 2014, where he is before the media talking about the District Detroit and how excited he is to build it and make it this wonderful thing. We'll play the clip, and we'll go from there.
It's about creating something awesome for our community, something that people enjoy and feel proud of. And like I said earlier, let's go do this together. And that applies to all of you in this room.
This way.
While our organization is stepping forward to master develop the district, opportunities abound to get involved in this district. There are over 100 parcels of land that will be making...
Democrats have the most anti-gun ticket in history, and they're focused on you.
Bingo.
Just listen to Joe Biden in his own words.
You're right if you have an assault weapon. The fact of the matter is they should be illegal, period.
Defend your freedom.
Can we spend 10 minutes on this
Harris.
attack ad? Here we go.
To get so it's our hope that folks like you, there are over 100 parcels of land that will be making part of this district special. And we're looking for people just like you to come forward. It's about creating something investors or to champion it to your friends you may have that are in the real estate business. And there are many parcels of land within this district that applies to all of you in this room. So it's our hope that folks like you, while our organization is stepping in purchasing and developing the district, something opportunities special to get involved in this district.
So this is a very small piece of a number of speeches that were given with the District Detroit Committee by Chris Ilitch himself, where they're talking about all these businesses that are coming. Here's all this opportunity to buy this plot of land They talked
many
about
parcels of
residential
land within this
space, movie
district that
theaters,
we don't
restaurants.
own.
It was this hustle and
So
bustle.
it's our hope that folks
I want
like
to,
you
before we continue, I'm going to
become
throw up a
interested in
couple
purchasing and
contrasting
developing these parcels
images
into
of
something,
what we were promised versus
special,
what was actually delivered.
within
Ben's
the
dialing them up
district
right now.
It's
So
about
you'll be able to
creating
see them, and our audience
something
will as well.
for our community,
Just
something
what was
that people
promised
enjoy
in
and feel
2014
proud
and
of.
those subsequent months versus
Like I
what we
said
actually
earlier,
saw. So here's the arena
go do this
where
together.
on the left we
And
get
that
this
applies
beautiful
to all of you
palatial,
in
it
this
looks like
room.
almost Oz, like the
While our
wonderful
organization is
land of
stepping
Oz,
forward to
Detroit Red
master
Wing
develop the
style,
district,
this
opportunities
illuminated Red Wing
abound
glass ceiling.
to get
And then,
involved
yeah,
in
and
this
even,
district.
I don't know if you can tell
There
from
are
this
over
far,
100
Chad, but
parcels
the
of
hustle and
land
bustle
that will
around,
be
it's a bunch of
making part
trees and
of this
whatnot.
district.
And then you
And
get
we're
the
looking for
reality
people
of the
just like
drab
you
Little
to
Caesars
come
Arena that
forward,
we see
develop,
now, where it's basically just
investors,
parking lots
or to
around it and not
champion it
much
to your
there.
friends you
So
may
that's the
have
first thing.
that
We're
are in the
promised
real
this
estate
arena on the
business.
left, and this is what we're
And there
delivered
are
on the
many,
right. Let's go to the
many
next one,
parcels
Ben.
of land within
This one is
district that
almost
we
more
don't own.
glaring. If you, I don't know, maybe
it's
I
our
don't know.
hope
You got to
that
get those
folks like
glasses
you
checked, Chad, or if you can see,
become
it's a little far
interested
for
in
you.
purchasing
Wonderful
and
for the
developing
audience,
these parcels
though.
Is that
into
out
something,
on Henry Street there?
special.
Well, which one are you talking about?
Right there.
The,
It's
the
about
fake one, or are you
creating
talking about
something awesome
Iraq?
The reality.
For our community,
Reality,
something
yeah.
that people
That's
enjoy,
that's
feel proud
Baghdad,
of.
Detroit, actually. So
Like I said earlier,
the point is,
let's
we
go
are
do this
promised.
together. And that
And we'll
applies
get to the
all of you in
conditions of
this
that
room.
promise, but we're promised this thing on
While
the
our
left. This is what
organization
we're
is
being
stepping
pitched,
forward
and this
to
is what's
master
delivered
develop
on the
the
right.
district,
So we can bring those
opportunities
down now.
abound
Obviously, a big
to
contrast.
get involved
Now,
in
it's
this
one thing to talk a big game,
There are over
but I
100
consider
parcels
it
of land
binding,
that
if
will
not
be
by
making
letter of
part
law,
of
but
the-
by spirit and by your moral code. I consider it binding that if you stand in front of this group and say, look, councilman, look, Mr. Mayor, if you only give me that $300 million in tax breaks and subsidies, here's what I'm going to give you. And you hold up these beautiful artist renderings, and people are playing hopscotch on the streets of Detroit, and people are drinking, mochachinos, and it's just the most wonderful thing in Detroit. It looks like something out of San Francisco before, all the bum shit on the ground. And then you don't deliver. You deliver Baghdad, which we saw on the right. You covered the District of Detroit at great length. I want to talk about Chris Ilitch. I know you don't know, but if you had to guess, your sense, did Chris Ilitch know all along when he's standing up there in 2014 and the subsequent years that he was pitching this, that it was never really going to come to fruition? Do you think this was an example of a guy twisting his mustache and saying, I can't believe I'm getting away with this? Or do you think the best laid plans were there, he really intended to deliver this and just hasn't for whatever reason?
I think it's the latter. I think they had these grand plans. Everybody has grand plans. And he's not the first person in Detroit to come along and lay one out that hasn't materialized. I mean, Gilbert was going to build a 913-foot skyscraper by now, and they are. It's going to be like a 676 foot or so skyscraper.
He went cheap.
Well, he scaled back as someone came in and said, "Hey, this isn't economics aren't going to work here," and that's something that's happened at same thing at Little Caesars Arena in District Detroit. Someone came in and we don't know a lot about the Ilitch's finances. Yes, they're billionaires, but they are billionaires they're settled with a lot of debt and seemingly with assets that don't necessarily always pump out a lot of cash, except for the pizza business. I think that seems to always do pretty well. But when you look at like their sports teams and their other enterprises, we just don't have a real sense of just how liquid they are, and they may not be as good as it looks. And then there's family dynamics there we don't really have a whole clue about since Mike died, and so something happened since Mike died. I think that's we can kind of figure that out. But the Ilitches, we're probably looking, as Chris was kind of saying in that video, if you want to come and help and be part of this, please raise your hand. Well, nobody raised their hand. With the exception of Wayne State, and they built them that Mike Ilitch business school. the rest of it has just been their stuff, and so nobody else jumped into their stuff for whatever reason. They have a little bit of a reputation not being necessarily the greatest developer to work with, and that reputation kind of gets around, and then other developers are like, no, I'm not really interested in doing that. And then there's just the layout of the District of Detroit that people still, kind of are like, okay, is this about parking lots and $20 parking fees, or is there a real infill vision here? And I think that's kind of still up for debate.
Well, at the end of the day, you pitched this image as a condition and as an inducement for that money, and not small potatoes money, big money. You talked about Dan Gilbert. He was going to build a 900-foot skyscraper, and he built a 700-foot skyscraper. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't take issue if the District of Detroit fell short of the aspirations that they put forth. I wouldn't take issue if they simply fell short. My issue is they didn't fall short. They just didn't do. They did nothing. The arena is not a district. It's so funny. They have like an app that you can go on. It's still called the District of Detroit. What's a district about it? It's just an arena. It's just an arena. And you can blame people not buying their plots of land. I happen to know two business owners. I'm not going to name them on the air. Maybe we can talk after. Who tried to do business with them. They have made it impossible to work with. They want an insane amount of money for a small plot of land. The perception from those two individuals, obviously anecdotal, but that the perception is that they don't want to do business. They don't want to have these people coming in for whatever he said in 2014. They want to control it. They want to squat on it and just have it be parking so they can control all the assets. They don't want to put the money into development, which is fine. That's their right. Welcome to America. But they are consciously blocking people who might be interested. Obviously, everyone has a price, but they're making it untenable. No one's going to open a little cafe if they're charging 7 times the rent that they would be charging otherwise if they weren't trying to otherwise control the land. So I get what you're saying of it takes two to play ball. They need some other people to come in and be down there. I'm telling you, I know 2 cases specifically that tried. They're impossible to work with. And that seems to be, I've heard stories from other people that seem to be along those lines. I think that they took that money. I don't know what was in their head, but the bottom line is they took that money and they are not meeting their end of the bargain. I think they took it and basically have run with it and have not honored their end of the bargain. Nothing really much has happened there. I had Tony Paulin from the Detroit News, friend of mine, really good reporter, might be the second or third best reporter behind you in the state, Chad. Very good guy.
Tony's really good.
He is an ace on the staff. We have a couple aces in the state of Michigan. Tony's wonderful. And he said the rumblings, and this is him, not me, and he said it on the show, the rumblings around his sources that basically it's just dead. I mean, have you heard anything? Are they just kind of like letting it die? Is this the end game, the Baghdad, Detroit?
Well, it is certainly, everything is on hold right now on several fronts, and this is clearly one of them. When you don't have your major sports teams competing in front of crowds, you're not going to induce like more investment into other types of spin-off developments like offices. I mean, you don't have offices filled.
They had 3 years before COVID, though, Chad, and
I
didn't break out one shovel.
I'm not doubting that, and just think about it in context. Those 3 years before COVID were the best boom years Michigan's had in 20 years. And so if you weren't able to sell it then, and they had sold, they sold the offices to Google, and they did a few, of their infills around the stadium, but otherwise there's still a lot of stuff sitting there vacant. And if you weren't able to figure it out, the economics then it's questionable if it's ever going to be infilled. I mean, there was always the idea of having that hotel right next to it along Henry Street and the interstate that was supposed to be like a luxury hotel for the players and such to stay at, to kind of basically compete with like Townsend and Birmingham. so that they're not driving out to the suburbs and they're just walking across the plaza. That never materialized. I mean, so there's a whole lot of things that didn't materialize. And I think it's going to be years before we see some new progress based on just where we are economically and also politically. I don't think it's any secret that Chris Ilitch has a really close ally in Mayor Mike Duggan. And if Duggan has been asked about this, especially after my colleagues Kirk Pinto and Bill Shea did the big expose last March on the District of Detroit, Duggan got asked about it, and he kind of downplayed it about and downplayed the DDA's role and where the DDA ought to step in and try to basically get clawbacks and so if Duggan doesn't get too hot about it, it's probably nobody else is really going to get too hot about it either. It doesn't look like. That's
kind of was my point. Is it seems like I'm screaming into the wind. It feels like most people are just resigned to it. I still want to see my little cafe where people are playing, chess and like all the things, walking their dogs. I still have that kind of dream for Detroit, and maybe what an idiot I am, I guess. I mean, that's kind of like, you took the money. You took the money. Where's my cafe? Where's my movie theater?
And we should also distinguish the difference between the District of Detroit development and, say, the incentives for the Gilbert, skyscraper at the Hudson site. Is Gilbert is getting basically a refund or a write-off on taxes that he would pay for materials, for construction costs, and on sales tax or use tax. And then he's going to be able to capture the income tax of residents and workers in that tower. Whereas the District of Detroit deal was the city of Detroit is going to take out $300 million of debt, or at least the DDA is going to take out this debt and make these and issue these bonds in order to subsidize your $900 million stadium. And that's just a completely different type of direct aid compared to the Gilbert situation, or even FCA's new auto plant, or even Ford in Corktown. Those incentive plans are all kind of focused around basically just basic tax breaks for periods of time. And the other thing long term I think about a lot is, and I'm thinking about it more lately, is in Detroit, we've given away a lot of the farm in order to spur these developments, but eventually you gotta have to feed the cows. I mean, when I mean that is that you could have bills that are going to come due, and when you've eroded your tax base like this, like they've done with the DDA district in downtown to subsidize the stadium, like they've done 30-year complete property tax abatement, Renaissance zone for the train station. Now let's hope the train station gets renovated. That'll be a transformational project if it comes to fruition. Transformational for Corktown and Southwest Detroit in general. But then we're just opening a new auto plant. That's our cover story this week in Crain's, is that new auto plant on Mack Avenue. Again, they also got 20, 30 years of various property tax breaks, and that's just going to be years and years and years not having that revenue. And the city's already facing some serious the biggest challenge since bankruptcy with COVID-19. The city is projecting they're going to lose $160 million in income tax over the next year from all the workers who aren't working downtown and paying income tax, or they're holed up in their suburban house or basement.
That's only half of what Chris Ilitch stole. So it's not that much. Why don't they call Chris for the money? Where's my cafe? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I just want my little cafe. Is that too much to ask? Can we build one cafe?
Well, I think there is some kind of plan for a new coffee shop out on Woodward.
I'm good.
At the Fillmore, right?
A $300 million cafe?
No, I don't think it's going to be that.
That'll be a hell of a cafe. What kind of beans are they serving up there? I just think you owe me something, Chad. Not you, but I mean, if you're Chris.
Well, remember the Apple store was supposed to happen? There was supposed to be an Apple store there.
I don't remember that.
That parking lot in front of Comerica?
Yeah.
They were going to turn that into a little strip mall of some sort with like an Apple store, and that was like a plan that was floated like I don't know 3 years ago. It was in Crain's. I've kind of forgotten about it, but don't tell now. But yeah, some of that stuff is not happening. But again, I think it's going to come down to political will, and if Detroiters rise up and tell Duggan that he needs to claw back money, then maybe Duggan will listen.
Well, the problem is it was a non-binding agreement, so I don't know what Duggan can do. That money went out the door. It's like, good luck with that. It was a disaster from the beginning. You had a no strings attached deal that was made on the basis of a couple pretty pictures that they have made no effort to strive to. I've said again and again and again, and we said it 10 minutes ago, fall short. That's fine, but break ground on something. Give me something, even if it is a $300 million cafe. I mean, give me something. And they failed, and that's where I stand on it. I might be the only one still mad. You said no one seems to give a shit anymore. I give a shit. I'll go to the grave giving a shit because I wanted my cafe and my dog park, and I think you owe them that. You owe the city that when you take that money. But that's where I stand. I want you to write a scathing report on Chris Ilitch in the District of Detroit in your next column. I really appreciate that as a personal favor, Chad.
Like I said, I don't bite on apples you throw here.
Yeah, you've thrown away a lot, and these are mostly rotten apples, so probably good call. There's worms in them and all. So we'll move on. I know you don't live close, so let's rip through the speed round. Something we do here, a little bit light. There's no time limit per se, but 3-5 sentences each. The first one's perfect because we just talked about him. Chris Ilitch, 3 to 5 sentences. What do you think of Chris Ilitch?
Cautious.
That's it? Okay.
Reserved.
Cautious and reserved.
Those are the words that come to mind.
That works. Our old friend in Michigan, Rick Snyder, recently in the news for endorsing Joe Biden. What do you think of Rick Snyder?
I think he is looking to continue to reaffirm what his legacy is. And I also think he's a little bored lately.
A little bored. I would argue he's trying to change his legacy more than reaffirm it. I think it's an appeal to half the state that hated him, the whole Joe Biden thing. That's my perception, but this is your round, not mine. Who wins in November, Trump versus Biden? Not who you want, who actually wins?
I'm not going to buy on that. I got out of the predictions.
That's not even an apple.
I got out of the predictions business in 2016.
You have no opinion whatsoever. You don't have to say who you're voting for. Chad, you are right down the middle. You'd be a great witness in a court case. Okay, we'll move on. I think Trump wins, but like 2 days ago I thought it was Biden. 2 days from now I'll probably be back on Biden. So it's like I'm all over the place, so don't take anything I say. Okay, well maybe you can give me an opinion on this since this can't really offend anybody. Best restaurant in Detroit. Downtown Detroit, like you're in the city. Where are you going? Best spot.
Roast.
Great spot. Good choice. I'm glad I actually knew it because I don't know half the restaurants in Detroit. Roast is a good choice. We'll go with that. Newspapers going behind paywalls. Obviously, Crain's has been behind a paywall forever, so far as I know. Detroit News, Detroit Free Press recently made the plunge. What do you think of newspapers going behind paywalls in Detroit?
It's about time.
About time. You agree. Good call.
And it's necessary for the survival. It's one of the reasons I left the Detroit News in 2016 because they had not gotten on this bandwagon. They and the Free Press and the whole Gannett organization. But I think they finally have figured out that this is it. They got to make this work, or one of them is going under.
I think it's the best buy in town right now. I mean, even if you go for that like 3-month thing for $1, they're doing at the Free Press. So I could spend $6 and get the both of them for several months. So
just quick advertising. If anybody would like a $79 deal for 1 year of Crain's, direct message me on Twitter. I'll send you a link.
You're telling me this now? I did like a $169 thing 4 hours ago. All right. Well, someone else can have my spot. Crain's is great though. I honestly, I did subscribe today. I've always read it, but it was just we got it to the office, so I would always just take the physical copy. So I've always read it, but I never had the digital. But I was doing show prep, the last 24 hours for this show, and
sure.
had the physical copy, but I needed to dive into your archives a little bit for today. So I actually did subscribe and gave you apparently an extra $100. So I hope that goes to, I don't know.
We're happy to help you. Yeah,
yeah. Maybe we can let's give it to Chris Ilitch. It'll be money well spent. All right, last we'll finish here. I have my vote for your answer, but I'll shut up. Weirdest story you have ever covered in your career?
I think you know the answer to that.
I
that
do.
would be the scandal of Todd Courser, the former state representative who sent out an anonymous email smearing himself, saying he was having a homosexual affair in order to cover up a heterosexual affair he was having with State Representative Cindy Gamrat. And that's about all I can say about it on the advice of my lawyers, because Todd has sued me a couple times.
He sued you a couple of times.
Unsuccessfully.
Thank you for clarifying. Some of those tapes you had, like you had recordings of your interview with him. I don't know. I can't remember if you like tweeted them out or I don't remember how you blasted them out. But those are some of the funniest things where he's just going off on you, and you're just like, "Oh, Todd, I don't know."
That was what I called him one time.
You called him. That's what it was.
Little journalist trick we sometimes do. Todd wouldn't pick up with my phone, so I called him on my wife's phone. And he picked up because he didn't recognize the number. It wasn't saved in his stuff, and so he picked up and answered some questions. I've used that trick a few times.
Well, okay, I'll be on the lookout in case you're ever investigating me for anything. But I mean, you basically hit it. But I think it's hilarious that somebody was having an affair in Lansing with a colleague, extramarital affair, knew or suspected that it was going to get out, and to sort of muddy up the waters, I guess was the strategy, created a fake affair where I think it was pretty crude too, wasn't it? Like he said he was having homosexual relations like in an alley or something.
Behind a popular Lansing nightclub.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah. So everyone would know. So to throw people off the scent, it's basically saying like, if there was some rumor that you stole money from like the church collection bin, you're gonna to throw people off on the credibility of that like true accusation. You're gonna say that you were like in the Taliban or something. Like it's just like he created a rumor about himself. It's one of my favorite stories ever. We did like an hour in studio just on that. You and I, we were here with Steve Neveling from Motor City Muckraker. We talked about a lot of things, but we spent about an hour on Todd Courser. So that's back in 2017 if you want that gem. So Chad Livengood, you know where I stand. I like most of the people that come in here, but you know I love you. I think you're the best journalist in the state. I love what you do, even if it drives me nuts that I can't get anything really strong on some of these things from you. But I think you're a throwback guy. There's very few guys that are guys or gals that are fitting in that mold. I think people are biased one way or another. They can't help themselves. Nolan Finley can't find anything nice to say about Gretchen Whitmer ever. And then virtually all the rest of the media is fawning. And I think you call balls and strikes, and I appreciate what you do. You're old school, and I think we need more of you, not less, for sure.
Hey, thanks for having me on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
Happy to have you, and gosh, please come back at some point. I hope I didn't scare you off. I promise I won't throw any more rotten apples at you. Well, no, I can't keep that promise. I can promise you won't bite, though. How about that? Chad Livengood, the best journalist in the state, in studio. Happy to have him. Ben Augusta. I'm exhausted, but Chad wouldn't give me anything. Can we go have a cigarette or something? I'm not a smoker, but can we go smoke or something after this? I need to relax.
I might have a cigar in the car.
He wore my ass out. I had nothing. So I love you guys for watching. We've been all over the map with our guests. We've ranged from anywhere between 16,000 hits to over 50,000 on the John Wharton episode. So we appreciate all you guys tuning in. This has been the Spiro Avenue Show. Chad Livengood from Crain's Detroit Business, top journalist in the state. I don't care what you say. It's true. Ben Augusta on the board. Great job by you, Ben, as always. Spiro Avenue out. We will see you later this week. We have another fun one coming up. Stay tuned. Thank you.